friends, welcome to the Energy Independent Show. I'm Les Mood, your host, where we cover hot product reviews, interviews, and news. Today, we have Steve Blume from Australia. He's the president of the Smart Energy Council. He has a wealth of information and experience in renewable and solar power generation, distribution policy, and more. He has a passion for renewable energy generation, like me and others. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks, Les, and I love your show. I went back and watched a few little episodes.
Well, thanks for doing that. We're really glad to have you, and it certainly adds to the show to have some knowledge and experience on with you here. So, we'll start with question one is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what motivates you in the energy industry?
Yeah, sure. So I'm 69 years old in a couple of months, and I've been passionate about a whole lot of things. I was a university ratbag and so on many years ago. Had a career and moved into IT, was in IT business, fixing businesses and so on. But almost my passion was about environmental issues, the planet, population, a whole lot of things like that. And about 25, 30 years ago, I realized that climate change was rapidly approaching, that we actually had solutions in the form of energy, clean energy of various types, and made it my business in my private time rather than my business for a few years, following up on that and trying to look at solutions. And then for the last, since just before 2000, I moved into the energy advising space pretty much permanently and started advising politicians and others about, and myself about what the solutions were, and just being an advocate for the possible future with a clean energy rather than dirty energy.
That's huge. I know on question two, you're part of the Smart Energy Council. You're the president there, right? And what do you do? What do you do in that role?
You're right. The Smart Energy Council, the Australian Smart Energy Council, harks back to 1954 or just shortly thereafter. It actually was the Australian branch of the solar energy societies that established around that time. And we were the first global one, one of two. There was one in the US and one in Australia. And it was the Australian Solar Energy Association, I think it was called, which became NZES, grew with New Zealand and so on. So it's a long history based on the solar research that was done in the 50s, then moved on into the 60s, really took off in the 70s with the fuel pressures of fuel shortages and so on. But then really around the mid-2000s, 2008, 2007, a group of us decided that really things had to happen about climate change and about solar in particular. And we effectively did a new constitution, hired a CEO, turned it into an industry body, really, because you have to fund yourself. And we still had chapters, and we still have chapters who are interested individuals, but we now have a bit more than 1,100 members in Australia, all of whom are, with a few exceptions, are small businesses, large businesses, EPCs, manufacturers of batteries, solar PV, developers, a couple of insurance companies, superannuation companies who are investors as well, interested in this, a couple of large consulting firms like KPMG, for example, are members of ours. And so it's really an advocacy role, but as a peak industry body, we advocate for clean energy and renewable solutions, with the motivation being addressing the challenges of climate change.
Well, that's really amazing. It sounds like the stakeholders are really rallied behind you there in Australia, and there are a lot of challenges. I'm curious, question three is, in the Australian market, how is being an island a challenge for energy there?
It's not just being an island, but being a very big island. I mean, Australia is about the same as the US without Alaska. So it's a big area, and so east to west about 4,500 kilometres, north to south about nearly 4,000 kilometres. And what we call the national electricity market, which is the electricity grid that serves about 80% of the population, is actually only on the east coast. It runs from the northern part of Australia right down to South Australia, down the east coast, and it's long and it's thin. It's nearly 5,000 kilometres, single grid. It's one of the longest in the world. And as you might imagine, that was largely done through public funding. and very thin in places. And so the challenge is really distance and, getting to now the energy resources that are clean energy to the loads, because we've got, big city loads of Melbourne, Sydney, which are about half the population in just those two cities. Brisbane has 2 million. There are a bunch of sort of urban areas, but then you've got a lot of smaller areas. And historically, the public paid to have those lines run out to them. They're now 60, 70, 80 years old. No one can afford to maintain those lines. A lot of them are still partly government owned, if not fully government owned. The retailers are privatised. So renewable energy and distributed energy is going to be the solution for a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, question 4 is, where leadership has happened there in Australia, what are the driving factors to major solar success there in the Australian market?
Different to most of the rest of the world, we had a number of jurisdictions. Mine, I live in the national capital, which is like DC. So it's in the Australian Capital Territory. It's actually a single state which has effectively a state government and a local government all in one management body and one voting body. And we established a feed-in tariff in 2008, started in 2009. A number of other jurisdictions did the same. What that did was push the emphasis on PV onto rooftops. And so Australia now has coming up to 3 million residential households with PV on their rooftop. That's 25% of all households. So the real driver at the moment, and initially it had to have feed-in tariffs, we've dropped 95% in the cost since that start. Right? So in a little over 12 years, we've gone a huge reduction in the cost. And the really interesting thing is that at the beginning, the cost on rooftop was massively 75, 80% on the system, and the balance of system cost was 25%. Right now that's reversed. And so the savings are now in efficiencies of installation, getting multiple, plug and play type activities, racking they used to always be bespoke systems. Nowadays, guys, where it used to take, I had mine put in 2009. It took a professional team of 2 people a day and a half, right? 3 kilowatts. Right?
Wow.
Now, if you're in the same location, you can easily do 2 a day with 2 people, and sometimes 3 a day. I'm talking about not multi-story houses, but 1 or 2 story residential homes. You can do that. So there's been a massive change. The main thing is people know it saves them money. Right? I mean, the first adopters, people like me, were doing it for environmental reasons, a whole bunch of, and because I'm a rich old white man, I can afford it. But most people are doing it for the sense that they like the idea that it helps to reduce emissions and all the rest of it. But the fact is, for self-consumption especially, it's really, really, the neighbours tell each other about how good it is. They talk about their bills and how it reduces their bills, right? And that's a good thing. And the large scale has been subsidised and supported through effectively a carbon tax since 2011 nationally, and that finishes this year. So, but the prices have gone down. So the solar success has largely been from the stimulation, like in Germany and other places, and California and so on, from government, and then it's self-fulfilling because once people see it, they love it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that, once you start the process of the market development, that it leads towards more awareness and interest in keeping with the Joneses. But it's also exciting and it's contagious, like a friend of mine, Scott Wynn, says about it. When you get it, it's kind of going to encourage other people to do it. So I do find it interesting there. But it's interesting how the economic impact really is driving it too, because that's kind of what we see in some markets where maybe the environment isn't the focus, but saving money sure is, or making money. Everybody likes money, I think. So that's interesting. Even if we can agree or people disagree on climate change, at least they have that in common, that they want to make money, which is nice to see. That's
one of the things, Les, I have to say, that's one of the things that we focus on. We're not a partisan group, so we don't support one side or another or anything. And one of the things that I think is important when you're looking at climate change is I don't need to change your motive. If the result of what it is, if what you're doing is what I want you to do, then that's good enough. I don't need to engage in an argument. To me, if you can make a buck out of it, why shouldn't you make a buck out of it if that's the driver and the result is the same place I'd go anyway because I have a heart thing about it? Why wouldn't you go there? And so to me, you know, it's a sort of a secondary argument. Don't get engaged in the distractions of a side argument. The world is changing regardless, whether people like it or not. Renewable energy, distributed energy resources, batteries, solar, wind, all this stuff is changing anyway, right? So 5 years ago, I was telling people this is the biggest economic opportunity the world's ever seen, right? Because we have to transform the energy system from dirty uses, and that's everything, transport, you name it, to clean. If you can't make a buck out of an environment like that, then we've got to do what we've built in 120 years. It's why we're rich. It's why why we can develop countries. It's all to do with fossil fuels. Nobody denies that, but that's called history, right? The future is not going to be that, and the technology is taking us there, not ideology, not politics, technology and cost. And so, if that's the case, don't argue about the ideology and the politics because it's not necessary. They're going to lose anyway, you know. So
yeah, I think it's a wasted time, to be honest, to focus on that, just because there's no, if everybody's going to drive on different roads to the same place, it really doesn't matter what road they take or what they believe, as long as we're all on going the same direction. So I that's refreshing to hear, and I appreciate that. On question 5, what are some of the lessons for the rest of the world in developing solar?
Well, I think one of the lessons that, and I mean, it's a bit presumptuous for Australia, you know, we have 25 million people. So there are sort of half a dozen cities in China that are bigger than that. So, and that's just the rest of the world. But we have learnt a lot. We're way ahead of anybody in terms of distributed systems. South Australia is at 55% of penetration of its network. It actually has, it's confronting right now excess of base demand in the middle of the day of about 200 megawatts in a 1.3, 1.5 gigawatt total system. So, because it's not a very big place, it's only got 2 million people, right? Southeast Queensland has areas of 90% penetration and so on. So on a technical level, there are a whole lot of things that Australia can teach people, because all our transmission guys, the distribution, the networks are really struggling because we started with rooftop PV, and that's in the C&I market as well. So commercial industrial is growing at about 30% a year as well. It had a little blip at the beginning of the year because of COVID, but it's back up. We had a record month last month, a record month the month before. And we've had big record months in 2019. So it's really, you know, we installed about 290 megawatts last month, you know.
Wow.
It's a small country, you know. Now, so the lesson is we know how to do this stuff really well, you know. So on rooftop, so at the installer level, we know how to do this stuff, and it's really efficient, it's really safe, it's fast, and the quality for the most part is good. So, you know, we focus a lot on standards, so that's really important, and particularly installer training and installer education, that sort of stuff. That's a critical part that needs to be followed through. So the real lessons are you can do this stuff, and what's interesting is we're doing lots of large scale now. There's a picture of one behind me, which is a small one. That's 30 megawatts. I've got another picture which shows 170. Yeah, I got two other pictures of ones that have come in the last year, 170 megawatts, and another one of 130 megawatts. So you know, we're having lots of those being put in. The real issue, and in overseas, a lot of them have been the big scale first and the low scale. The really interesting thing is now when you go to the US or, and particularly California, but anyway, all the southern part of the US, where you've got massive solar resource, Europe, where you've got less solar resource, but you've got a lot of rooftops and you've got a lot of space, where it's urban areas and land is costly, then rooftop makes sense. And most of it is, you know, you don't have any of the line losses or anything, you self-consume. You don't want to be telling people they're going to make money out of export. They're producing wholesale electrons, right, at really low cost at a time of day when there's probably thousands or millions of others doing the same thing. Self-consumption is the name of the game. So, but we have lessons to teach and help with people who want to get this stuff done, and it's good business.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I like that. That's a lesson to learn, and I encourage people to do I think that the economics are better when you're eliminating a kilowatt hour that you'd otherwise have to pay for as a consumer, as opposed to being a distributor. The economics are far greater for energy independence than they are for energy distribution. And it also leapfrogs the challenges of infrastructure necessary to do the export and distribution. So I think you're right. I think it's a really good overall lesson for us, is essentially microgrids or energy independence or self-consumption. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I'm a little more cautious with the independent stuff. And the reason is because I know I lived in the US for a while as an exchange student, and I've traveled there a lot, and it's everywhere in the world. Almost everybody takes their grid for granted. Right? There's a value there, there's a community value. In Australia, we have a universal health system called Medicare, right? Canada has a similar sort of thing. UK has a similar sort. I say that the networks are the Medicare for energy, right? Yeah. Because when we walk into our house, you and I, and this is why I'm not a great fan of prosumer, for example, right? You and I walk into a house, I just want to switch on the switch of whatever it is I want to use the electricity for, and I expect it to work, right? So I don't have to think about, do I need to restrict my use? Do I need to, is my battery running properly? Is my PV system running? I'm happy to get that information if necessary, but I really don't want to have to think about it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we've provided. All our electricity systems in most places in Western worlds, we actually have such a reliable system, and it's such good quality that it's just taken for granted. And when we don't take it for granted is when there's a fire or some sort of incident that knocks it out. And we realise when we have no power for a couple of hours or 10 minutes even, let alone days. We've had fires here, and there are people been without electricity now for 5 months, right? Because their houses were burnt down, so they're living in caravans or tents or whatever. So the energy independent stuff, if you can, and it makes sense, and a lot of the networks in Australia, for example, in Western Australia, they're just building microgrids. They're putting in battery storage. They're putting in wind, solar. They still might have the old single line, what we call swers, we call them. But anyway, it doesn't matter. They're single line out to a very thin place in a town. They're replacing those with microgrids locally. And that line is really only, sort of backup. And so the grid is the backup, effectively.
Right.
And it means you don't have to worry, because you're not going to replace it, and you just need to do maintenance on it and a whole bunch of other stuff. Mm-hmm. So, but that's, it is really valuable. People see the value of it. The biggest, in Australia, the biggest determinant of whether you have PV is whether your neighbour has it. And if your neighbours get it, once you get to about 15% penetration, it's self-fulfilling and moves on from that.
Right, absolutely. Well, it kind of reminds me of public-private partnerships, which I'll ask you about later. The symbiosis between the utility grid, or in this case, Medicare, or for the consumer, I think is important. And independence in general can be, financial independence. You don't necessarily need to isolate yourself with energy, and I really appreciate your description there. Question number 6, I'm curious what you think, what storage will play in the role of adoption of solar here in the coming years.
Yeah, look, if you'd have asked me 4 or 5 years ago, or even 4 years ago, I was talking about a massive growth in storage, particularly residential storage. I changed fairly quickly and the reason is because storage doesn't need solar, but solar needs storage, right? Mm-hmm. In a way, you can put anything into the battery. So the battery could come from low-cost stuff off the grid, or whatever's charging up the battery can come from any energy source, right? But solar just runs when the sun's shining. It's just technically, and the wind only does when it's blowing. We know that, mm-hmm. right? Grids mean you can spread all that, so you can actually move that stuff around and be countervailing wind conditions and solar conditions. So long high voltage DC lines, for example, east-west, make a lot of sense for a lot of places, right? If you've got high solar resource. China's done that. They've got one that's close to 4,000 kilometres long, and they've got a couple of others that are 2,000 odd kilometres, and they're all being built like that. So the real issue for me is the EVs have moved so fast, and actually the production for EVs in not just Tesla. This is all sorts of EVs. Tesla was out there and is innovative, But every car manufacturer in the world, bar none, are having an EV vehicle sometime in the next couple of years, right? At home in Australia at the moment, I can get about 8 kilowatts of battery, 8 kilowatts of solar for about 10 grand, right, installed. Right? But that's like 8 kilowatts. If I buy the cheapest, littlest EV car, it's going to have 18 or 20 or 30 kilowatt battery in it. And a Tesla or something like that have 90, 100, 120 kilowatt. Right? Mm-hmm. So you're sort of going to park a car in your garage that you're only going to drive, average is about 45 miles a day in the US is the average commute, right? That's the average number of miles driven a day. You've got this battery sitting there. You're only going to need, like your car, you don't fill it up every day. And we've all got this into our head, the iPhone, the phone type thing where you've got to plug it in because you're worried about the range anxieties. As much to do with our understanding of how we use our phones and laptops and things like that, where they are small batteries and tight compressed spaces, and you've got to charge them up, otherwise you run out. Right? Well, everybody I know that owns an EV, nearly all of them, all the Tesla owners I know, they usually charge on weekends. They usually charge during the daytime, on weekends, at home, because it just takes 6 or 7 hours with their regular charger. They do use fast chargers and go on trips and stuff, and it's about the same distance. You'd need to take a half-hour break anyway, blah, blah, blah. So all I'm saying is it almost cannibalizes the home market, So the numbers for batteries, because unless the costs go down significantly, they're still too high for residential, right? So unless the numbers go down dramatically, it's going to be a bit hard sell for residential solar, off-grid or somewhere where you, if you want UPS or backup, no brainer. Like I got friends who regularly, they're just on a thin part of the network. They get blackouts of a couple of hours, probably once a month, like it's just, because trees knock down lines and so on. They've spent money on a good battery system that will give them 3 to 5 hours, right? But that's because they valued that downtime's at that level and can afford it. For most people, it's going to be a tough call. However, the real issue is going to be, and this is happening in suburbs in Australia now. We have 2 suburbs in the ACT where I am, one of which has no gas at all. It's not mandated to have gas connections in the ACT anymore. It used to be up until a year and a half ago. But what's happening is they've got one with 4,500 homes. Every one of them has solar on it, right? Every one. They're also putting in a community battery, a precinct battery, a large one. And around the country, we've got lots of 20 to 30 megawatt hour batteries being installed on the grid, either in a precinct or somewhere where there's a weakness in the grid, because they don't just provide, power. There's a whole bunch of the other services they provide that stabilise the grid and can fix a whole lot of things. So it's really important for storage. But it's a bit more subtle than that too, Les. I'm not taking more than 2 minutes here, but it's a little bit more subtle than that. The storage is your hot water system. Storage is anywhere where you can, put in electricity and use it later. The energy, because mostly we're using it for heat and stuff. So it's actually a really broad question. That's a whole conversation by itself.
Well, I think that what you're getting to, which is kind of my opinion as a contractor, is that energy storage is very expensive for a home or even a business. And when you can have a vehicle be your battery and it's got wheels and it rolls around and you're not using all of it for driving, I think vehicle to grid technology will essentially leapfrog all forms of energy power that comes from intermittency. Is that what you're getting to?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And I think that having essentially an automatic transfer switch on a property is probably the most important component that you could have to isolate yourself from the grid when you need to, if there's a power outage, combined with the vehicle to home. I really look forward to that technology being developed in the United States, which seems to be a little behind Japan and other markets, but hopefully Tesla and other companies are prepared for it. I think their computer chips at Tesla are prepared for vehicle to grid, which is a revolutionary leapfrog in the whole thing. So I'm excited about that. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I agree.
There's also a repurposing of the batteries. A car battery is not finished at eight years or 200,000 miles.
Hmm.
These things can last, the new ones now can last 15 or 20 years if they're managed properly.
Right.
For a household, for a car, they don't let it drop below about 80%. And when it gets to 80% permanently, they say the battery's finished, but it's not. And so I think there's a market coming along, provided, the installers and the house has been designed so that you can plug in a battery system or drop in there's going to be repurposing and reuse of this stuff in other than automotive. Because in a household, the draw, the demand, everything you're using the battery for is totally different to a car. And so, and there are millions of these things going out in cars. So that home storage stuff, and particularly commercial, is going to change in the next 5 or 6 years as cars get on sold, become into the second-hand market, meet their 8 or 9 year lifespan or whatever. So the next decade is going to see another change in that direction too.
Yeah, there's a congressman in Kentucky in the United States. His name's Thomas Massey. He's an electrical engineer, and he actually took old Tesla batteries, I think from a Model S, and he actually drives a Model S, and he's completely off the grid, and he uses an old Tesla battery combined with his solar, which he installed himself. So it's quite impressive. I think that there's a lot of us who see that happening here, and it's accelerating very rapidly. The more EVs that are on the road, the more it's going to impact all of us. So question 7 is, what advice can developing and emerging markets get from Australia?
Yeah, again, I wouldn't be too presumptuous about that. I'm involved in lots of international. I'm on the Global Solar Council and the Asia Pacific PV Industry Association, and the New Zealand Pacific Solar and Storage Council, and a bunch of others. So we sort of help, particularly developing countries rather than, and they are emerging markets. We have a lot to do with that. Really, the way that the advice is jump in early and seriously look at the lifetime costs. That's the real issue. Because if you have a look at anybody that's building, so in emerging markets, so Africa or Asia, where there's still some, not very many, I have to say, but the finance is driving the answers. So if you seriously look at the finances and you look at the lifetime of the product you're going to build, I mean, all renewables are a massive capital injection up front, all of them, right? But they have no fuel cost. They have a smaller O&M cost from most of the solid state devices, so their O&M cost is lower than almost any other technology. What's wrong with this picture? Nothing, right? And if you look at the competitor, which is either gas or coal, even forgetting emissions, which should be priced at a reasonable size, but forgetting emissions, they still can't compete. And if you're looking, these have got lifetimes. A financial structure is 15 or 20 years. The lifetime of most plants are going to be 40 years. Solar PV and wind are looking about the same. Lazard and others, there is no comparison. And so if you're an emerging country, just look at the numbers, is what I say. Don't get distracted by the climate change emissions arguments about, all that sort of stuff. It's just the numbers. Just look at the numbers and you win. And you win by going clean. It's that simple.
Yeah, well, that actually, it's intriguing to me because I'm a numbers person. And instead of having a capital investment into infrastructure that requires cost and would therefore take money out of the economy, energy is good, energy is great, it leads towards other economic development. But when that energy itself requires constant input of some of that capital development, then it can't compare. So these fossil fuel projects and that require intensive energy and capital continuous each year versus something set it and forget it and watch it grow. Essentially, the economy can build and grow around the technology even faster, I think, than it can as an energy form, just because of the efficiency of the numbers, like you indicated. So question number 8 is, what are some interesting facts about the Australian energy market we should know?
Look, it's highly regulated, but not regulated at the retail end. It's partly government owned in some of the networks, partly not. So it's very complex. We have effectively 3 national regulators, or 4 national regulators plus state regulators, plus state licensing, I mean, I actually think the US might be worse in some respects. I've looked at the California example, but so it is complex. The other thing is in the solar industry, we have, my recollection looking last time, about 120 different suppliers of panels, for example, and about 40 different inverter suppliers. They all have to meet standards and so on. The top 5 in Australia have less than 20% of the market. There is no, when I, like 12 years ago, there were 2 inverter suppliers and SMA had about 80% of the market, the German company, right? We have a couple of big names, but it's a really, and that means it's a hard sell for installers and things like that, because it becomes a cost issue and it should be a value issue. All this stuff should be all about value, because it adds value to all sorts of things, not least the community, but for the individuals as well, and businesses especially. You know, self-consumption using solar and storage type stuff, particularly the solar stuff, is just a no-brainer because it's straight to your bottom line. You know, like as you said, you're actually investing instead of a car or a building or some tools which help you get your revenue. This is net to your bottom line. You know, when you don't pay a bill or you don't pay for anything, so energy efficiency is the same. You know, if you can make it more efficient, you use soft start motors and all that sort of inverters and all that sort of thing, it just goes straight to your bottom line. There is a no better business model than saving money straight to your bottom line, because, you know, if you've got a margin of, you know, say your margin 20%, I don't know anybody with a 20% margin. You've got a 20% margin, that means you've got to sell 5 times as much as that in revenue, right? Let alone the costs of making the business, of doing the business, to get that same money if it was from energy savings, you know, or PV. So again, it's the numbers, you know, you always got to convert it to, if I'm selling something, what's the revenue I need to make to get that net into my business? Mm-hmm. And this is mostly net of tax. It's net of, you know, so you sort of go, well, that's a net of tax injection to my business as the result of what I'm going to do. What do I have to do in my business to get that if I do it another way? Well, you know, if I got to spend 20 grand, it means I've got a revenue of 120 grand.
Absolutely.
Mostly when you talk to a business, they go, oh, because they're not used to thinking of it that way. I mean, they're just not used to thinking that way, but that's exactly how you've got to think of it.
Yeah, I agree. I've done a lot of business with some smart business people, and I think here's the way I look at it is, if your profit margins on your business are say 15%, and your energy cost is 15% of your revenue, that means you could double your profits without lifting a finger, without hiring a body or expanding your business.
Effectively, no cost other than the capital cost. Like you got to fund it somehow, but nowadays interest rates are so low anyway for most people, and that's tax deductible too. So you sort of go, why wouldn't you do this? You know, it's a no-brainer, but it's a bit new for a lot of people. I mean, it's not so much now in Australia. We have that sort of side of the cell. The biggest side of the constraint in Australia is some of the networks have connection constraints in terms of export. They just reduce your export, because the grid is so thin and not well, you know, can't manage the export. But if you're doing self-consumption, you don't care about it. You know, I don't even care if I'm not, you know, putting anything out to the grid, because I make my money inside. So
right, yeah, it's a better return on investment when you're doing self-consumption, and there's no better thing than to make your home, your castle, or your business more profitable and resilient. So I appreciate that perspective. Question number 9 is, can you tell us what you think the future of energy looks like?
Look, whether it's going to get, I think it's going to be there. It's going to be cleaner. It's going to be easier for most people. I'd like it to be invisibly so. I mean, you know, the beauty of what we've got from fossil fuels is that it's ubiquitous. It gives us freedom, right? That's what we're getting. We get freedom because we can heat, cool, travel, make things, build things. You know, everything is down to our energy use. That's everything, right? Our whole lives in the Western world and those in the developing countries aspire to the same thing. We can give them water, housing. I mean, there are environmental issues and all the rest of it we have to manage, and just sheer population is going to make a mess of that. But even so, it's all about energy. So if you can do it, and the beauty of the clean energy, it's really accessible. You know, I went to Myanmar in 2017, up in the hills, right? And there's a guy, a rubber plantation, still walking around in his, you know, white clothes with a knife and putting scratches in the trees of the rubber plantation. And he had 3 he lived in a little hut on the plantation with his family, his wife and 5 kids, right? 3 solar panels, right? And he was and I asked him about the solar panels through an interpreter and batteries, 12-volt batteries, 3 solar panels, right? But that was their light. That meant they could read at night time, which they couldn't other. Kids can study, all that sort of stuff, right? Really life-changing stuff. And he charges his mobile phone. Their connection is through the mobile phone right across Myanmar, right? They jump telephone lines. That was all really accessible, really low cost. I mean, he had wires strung along some posts in the middle of the paddock so the solar panel was in the right spot, and he used to go out twice a day to move it. So lunchtime he'd change around so it was facing the other way, right? And that's everywhere, So we're in the West and we're talking about massive conversion and we want to have our TVs and all our stuff, and that's great, and we got to do that cleanly. But a lot of the world doesn't have any of that stuff. So to me, the accessibility of most of this stuff, the really basic stuff, is just that's where the world's going. And as long as we can manage all the other problems, which sheer numbers are going to cause to us, then the energy part, I think, is the easy part.
Wow. Well, that's really inspiring, actually, because energy access, I believe, can bridge the digital divide. And the example of education of a light bulb with a book is great, as well as plugging in a cell phone that's connected to a tower where they're now onboarding to the internet. And the internet has really revolutionized society. And really, that's all built upon electricity, the internet. So I see renewable energy as an extension of the internet, because we've gone from electricity to the internet. And now we're figuring out, like we're talking now, how to make renewable energy the mainstay of that electric revolution. And it's really inspiring to think about what difference it could make in the world for those without energy access. As nice as it would be for us to power our Teslas with solar power, that's exciting too. But so is energy access for the world. And so, Steve, before we let you go and let you get back to work there, question 10 is: in these trying times, can you leave us with a favorite quote or something uplifting?
Well, I'm an eternal optimist. I got 100 quotes I use, but I think, it's almost, we can do this. I mean, this is if you have a look at and the way we do this, it's interesting. I read history, I read politics. I was involved in politics as a political advisor for a while and for a number of years, and still am in many ways. Human progress has come through cooperation and collaboration. There is no revolution, right? Revolution, you ever look at how things change because groups of people get together and decide to do stuff, right? And it might be, 1 or 2 people, it might be a neighborhood, or it might be, a social club, or it could be anything. But you have a look at how, and it doesn't matter whether it's, the poorest country in the world, and it's at the tribal level or the family level, or the US, a really rich country, or Australia, or places like everywhere you go, it comes from collaboration and cooperation. And if you have a look at research, everything, there are breakthroughs. There's really smart guys around who, men and women who are, they're not Elon Musk, imaginative, innovative. These are building on the shoulders of everybody else that's come before, the one who stands up and manages to commercialize it might get the kudos and the money. Oftentimes somebody else gets the kudos, gets the money and the kudos. And the poor person who actually did it doesn't get the money, but nobody does anything this alone. So none of us are alone, COVID or not. Here we are, 13,000 miles apart, talking over, face to face. We could be in the room next door or across the coffee table. I prefer to be across the coffee table, but we're doing it together, and it's because of that. And that's, there are lots of nasty things happen on the internet, and you despair sometimes, but you can't engage with that stuff. And the point about that is the old story: don't engage with the stupid because they'll outlast you. They'll just outlast you and grind you down. So don't do it. Give them their tinfoil hat and let them go away. Don't worry about it. So I think that's it. We just do this stuff together.
Yeah, well, that's a really inspiring message. I think that's why our slogan as a revolution is here. Join us, because the technology revolution has already happened. Like you've indicated, Australia is a good example for us, the world, to learn from. And really what we need to do now is unite and collaborate, and we can make big things happen, and they can happen quickly. Energy access should be available for all it can be. And I appreciate you sharing your experiences, your eternal optimism, and your time with us, Steve. I look forward to talking with you in the future, and hopefully we'll go to collaborate and work together in other ways to support this positive development that we should all be focused on. Again, thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Les.
All right, Steve, we'll see you soon.
See you again.
That's it for the Hot Energy interview. The revolution is here. Thank you for joining us. Feel free to like, comment, share, and follow. We will see you soon.